Good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started with our 9 o'clock informational briefing with the Committees on Finance and Ways and Means. Thank you very much for joining us on day 2 of this marathon series of departments and divisions coming before us. So we're going to go ahead and get right into it, starting off with the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. So Joby, if you wanted to come forward.
Do you want us from here? Okay. Good morning, Chair Tokuda, Chair Luke, distinguished members of the Committees on House Finance and Senate Ways and Means. My name is Joby Masagatani, and I am the Chair of the Hawaiian Homes Commission and the Director of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. With me also is my Deputy Director, William Aila, and we're so excited that he's going to be joining our team at Hawaiian Homes and the members of my staff. DHHL, as you know, if I may, I'd like to just summarize my testimony. So as you know, DHHL is a unique agency. The department, when the state became a state in 1959, it accepted the responsibility of administering the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act as a condition of statehood. This was a compact between the state and the people of Hawaii and the federal government. So the obligation to administer the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act for the betterment of the Native Hawaiian people is a trust obligation shared not only by the Commission and the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, but the entire state of Hawaii and the people of Hawaii. To this end, to successfully meet our obligation, providing sufficient funding for the department is a critical element. To this point, in our testimony, on page 4 of the testimony, on page 4 of the testimony, Article 12, Section 1 is clear in terms of the obligation of the state in stating that the legislature shall make sufficient sums available for the following purposes. Number 1, the development of home, agricultural, farm, and ranch lots. Number 2, home, agricultural, aquacultural, farm, and ranch loans. Number 3, rehabilitation projects to include, but not be limited to, educational, economic, political, social, and cultural processes by which the general welfare and conditions of Native Hawaiians are thereby improved. And number 4, the administration and operating budget of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. Related to this issue of sufficient funding, the Nelson lawsuit, which was a lawsuit that was brought forward by a number of beneficiaries, questioned the state's commitment or meeting of this obligation to provide sufficient funding. The Supreme Court opined that while the first 3 purposes articulated in Article 12 were political in nature and therefore left to this body to determine what is sufficient, the 4th purpose, which is operations and administration, could be judicially determined. I go through this because for the department, we are unique in the budget that we bring to the legislature, in part because of this Supreme Court decision, which indicates that our fiduciary obligation as commissioners, that we make the ask of this body as to what the department feels is sufficient to meet the 4 purposes under the Constitution for the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. That sufficient funds budget is indicated on page number 5 of our testimony, which is different than the governor's request on behalf of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. If I may, the tables at the bottom of page 5 indicate the ask for the first 3 purposes under the Constitution, which includes lot development, loans, and rehabilitation projects. Those 3 purposes collectively in both C and A sources of funding, general obligation bonds, as well as general funds, totals over $144.6 million in fiscal year 2016 and $227 million in fiscal year 2017. If the committees are so interested, we can provide the detail for this sufficient funds request for the purposes that are considered political in nature and left to this body to determine. The 4th purpose, the operations and administration, is in the table above that on page 5 of our testimony. For that, we are asking, it is broken up into 2 parts, what you would consider typically operating and administrative expenses or personnel and other current expenses related to the department equaling $28.47 million, almost $28.5 million in fiscal year 2016, and a total of 261 positions. This is an additional 61 positions over our current FTE count of 200 permanent positions. In fiscal year 2017, we're asking for the same amount for our A and B costs or personnel and other current expenditures. In addition to that, the department is asking for an allocation to take care of our repair and maintenance expenditures for our existing infrastructure, which we consider under Purpose 4 or Operations and Administration. In fiscal year 2016, our ask for that amount for existing infrastructure, this is taking care of roads, sewer systems, maintaining drainage ditches, and the like, energizing our subdivisions. Our ask for fiscal year 2016 is $40.1 million, and for 2017, the same amount, $40.1. In general obligation bond financing, the source of funding is for CIP, but the purpose is to take care of repair and maintenance issues associated with our existing infrastructure. The total ask then under Purpose 4 that we feel is sufficient to meet our operating and administrative expenses for the Department of Hawaiian Homelands in this biennium in fiscal year 2016 is $68.6 million in both general funds and general obligation bond financing, and the same amount in fiscal year 2017. Now, we recognize as the Commission, we do not have the burden that the Governor and this distinguished body has of balancing the ask of sufficiency for DHHL against the pressing needs of the rest of the state. And so the balance of my time, I'd like to focus on the Governor's request on behalf of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. That begins on Table 3. Specifically, I would like to speak to the general funding of $9.632 million. It is a non-recurring cost, and that was a level of funding that was provided to the department in the current fiscal year. We pretty much expended all of it. It takes us almost to 3/4 of spending in actual expenditures in a given fiscal year. So it's a flat line from the current level of spending. We would ask this body to, at a minimum, approve this request that the Governor has made on our behalf in terms of our general fund request. On our CIP side, and I turn to table 22 of our testimony. If you add up the specific projects that are indicated in our ask, or in the Governor's ask on our behalf, in fiscal year 2016, it totals to $5 million. In fiscal year 2017, it totals to $10 million of general obligation bond financing. The $20 million is the funding associated with our federal funds or the Native American and Housing Self-Determination Act or NAHASDA resources that are given to DHHL every year by HUD. This, of course, is subject to the appropriations and the politics of Congress, which, as we know, are not the most favorable for Native Hawaiian programs at the current time. In any case, what we would ask of this body is that instead of breaking it out by specific projects, these identify the projects that we consider of highest priority. We would ask, consistent with other state agencies, that we be given a lump sum number of $5 million and $10 million. And this would allow for us to, in the event that some of these projects have problems in being shovel ready, for us to switch to other projects that may be ready to go. Our need in terms of our repair and maintenance expenditures for existing infrastructure is about 3 to 4 times this ask. So I think we'll have sufficient projects in order to do that. And it's consistent with the way other agencies like DOE and DAGS has a line item for the repair and maintenance of existing infrastructure, existing buildings. And we would be more than happy to provide any report as to the expenditure of these resources to this body as they needed to see how we actually expended the funds. And that concludes my testimony, and I'm available for any questions that you may have.
Members, questions? Some members? Any house members, questions?
I have a question. You indicated in Table 2 that the Governor has already approved the $9.6 million request that you are coming in with. But on Table 4, when we look at the budget decisions, it doesn't indicate.
Our meeting with the Governor is actually tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And so these were the preliminary numbers that were passed back to us by Budget and Finance in terms of what the recommendation would be by BNF to the Governor for tomorrow.
So as far as the other items on table 4 are still under consideration, or have they all been rejected?
I believe everything is still under consideration until tomorrow's discussion happens with the governor.
Okay.
And I believe any final changes will be probably reflected in a subsequent governor's message to this body.
So as far as you know, the only one that has been approved by both BNF and the governor is the 9.6.
I believe that's a recommendation of BNF to the governor. I don't think the governor has made his final decisions.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Members, any questions? Senator Chinoku?
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
I wondered, with the 40 million that you've identified for, I'm sorry, not existing, the 144.6 million and 227 million, with
Yes.
that infrastructure and loan capitalization, what does that equate to in terms of number of homes potentially for families waiting?
We don't have the actual, because this actually encompasses 3 different purposes. As I recall, the rehabilitation figure for this amount is about between 13 and 14 million, another 70 to 73 million for our loan capitalization. So just doing the math very quickly, maybe about 70 to 80 million in infrastructure or lot development costs. We would have to go back and actually do the calculation, because in many cases, in order for us to get to a shovel-ready project, there's substantial off-site infrastructure costs that also has to be done. So in some cases, for example, this number encompasses an $8 million improvement that we would need to do in Lahaina, above Lahaina, in order to bring the water down to open up, let's say, another 100 to 150 units that we have in Leali'i. So we'd have to go back actually and take those off-site infrastructure cost allocations against the potential lots that we would have to develop in order to give you a sense. But on average, over the last 10 years, the number of lots that we've actually gotten to occupancy level when we had the 30 million steady cash flow was between 150 to 200 lots a year that we actually had completed, and occupied by lessees on average.
I think there's about 26,000 applicants, of which it's farm as well as residential applications.
Yes.
But at that rate,
So with regard to the waiting list, because you're referencing our waiting list, the 26,000 individuals represents approximately 43,000 applications. But what we're trying to get clear in terms of the waiting list so that people understand is the waiting list is actually a desire by an individual to reside on the homelands at some point in the future. And the analogy I use is if I were to ask everyone in this room, how many of you are likely to see a movie next year? Probably everybody's hand would go up. But if I were to say, how many of you want to see a movie this afternoon at 4 o'clock? We're going to go see Hero 6. Maybe 10 of you would raise their hand. And that's a situation we find with the homelands, is while we may have a project of 100 units ready, depending on where it is, it takes us maybe 5,000. We have to go through the list sometimes twice to find 100 people that want to live in that location, are ready to move, and if there is a home with a debt attached to it, can financially afford to get into that home. For us, we are probably doing the most to make home ownership affordable to citizens of this state. So our turnkey product with no additional subsidy is between $200,000 and $250,000 for a 3 to 4 bedroom house, comparable to 500 to 600. Now with the prices going up, 600,000 to 700,000 in the fee simple world. In addition, by using Nahasda, we're able to bring those prices down, especially in our oldest communities like Molokai and Hilo, where a family can get into a home for less than $500 a month, principal and interest. So we share the same concern you do, Senator, in terms of getting our home ownership affordable for our families.
I know that in asking all the trustees over the years if there was interest in building more of the rental housing, I still haven't seen much progress in that regard. I think every trustee has told me and of course the directors as well, yourself and others. But is that going to happen?
I hope so. We just finished. In fact, the contractor's study is sitting. Just got put on the desk of the staff that's responsible to see if we can do an affordable rental for our kupuna. That's the target that I'm most concerned about, because our median age on the applicant list is 55 for Oahu. But in order to do subsidized rentals on the homelands without tapping too many other sources, we have to have a source of income to provide the support. So we're looking at a mixed use, commercial supporting the condos. And so we had a feasibility analysis done by a consultant to help us understand the economics of it. And we're looking at Kapolei to see if we can do the project in Kapolei, near to where the rail is coming in, where we have some available lands, and supporting the desire to go higher density in those areas that are close to the rail.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
House members, any questions? Okay, if not, Senator Inouye.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning.
Good morning,
Happy New Year, Joby. Several years ago, and I'm not sure if it was last year or the previous year, the legislature passed a measure with regards to the dam repair infrastructure.
Yes.
With regards to what happened on Kauai.
Yes.
And I believe, I think there were some CIPs that went along with the repairs of infrastructure throughout the state.
Yes.
I'm just wondering if you were notified on your lands, if there were any wells or water infrastructure that were affected. And let me just share one thing that it has drawn my Waimea, Hawaii, Big Island farmers pretty upset in a sense because, and I guess I'll bring this up with DLNR when they come before us, and I'm glad the former director is here as well, because I understand the consultant or the department has been going around statewide and has instructed or talked to the farmers saying, you know, these are in need of repair. Are you using me?
I can hear you.
They're not sharing information with communities as to what the plans are. And what's upsetting is that the assessments have been done and only talking to so many people, but what affects our farmers as well is how are you going to do the planning? What's going to happen if you're going to cut back the well, stop the flow of water, and then you know, somehow keep the water flowing, whether it's for agriculture or I'm not sure if it affects potable water as well. But I'm just wondering if, I'm curious because I see in your budget several water system CIP projects. I'm not sure if it affects that. It's the Anacola. I think you got, what, a couple of $100,000, and there's another one. My document here is rather small, so I can't see the numbers. So just to ask if you were affected with the dam infrastructure program that the state has passed.
Yes, we were impacted by the regulations as it related to dam safety, particularly on the island of Kauai in the Anahola region. There are 4 reservoirs that we have up there that just went through a rigorous study to understand what the best options are to address the concerns regarding dam safety. Last year, we requested of this body $6 million to make the sufficient repairs to that, and also to restore what could be restored to address the agricultural needs of that region for homesteaders or potential homesteading. The legislature provided $3 million, which we were able to start some of the work on. We're coming in for the additional $3 million to finish the work to repair those dams in Anahola. I'm not sure if your question with regard to Waimea is with regard to the ag water system there. There is a large, I believe it's a reservoir. it's on the Homelands, but it's not our system. I believe it's actually Department of Ag system. So we have been trying to cooperate with them as they repair that reservoir, but the status of that project is probably left best asked of Scott Enright. So I'm somewhat aware of it. In our case, in terms of the notification of our beneficiaries, and therefore, although we focus on our beneficiaries, they are always public meetings. Anyone from the public can attend. We did go out to Anahola to brief the beneficiaries about this dam repair and the potential impacts when this was going on, I believe in the late 2012. So for us, the notification and involvement of our beneficiaries is a very important part of our process, and we take it very seriously. I can't speak to the Department of Ag and their process of public notification. You're welcome.
All right, thank you. Any House members, questions? Okay, if not, Senators. Senator Galatario.
Aloha, Joey.
Good morning. How are you,
And
Senator?
aloha to Deputy Ayla as well. I guess the 900-pound gorilla in the room is the fact that the settlement monies are done. And it, if I recall, it's $30 million a year
Yes.
for 20 years. And this body has, for many years, attempted to find a way by which to make up for that when the eventual deficiency would show up. And over time, the Hawaiian Homelands, it almost became a budget line item. So what will happen now that it's concluded? Because that's a $30 million chunk of change.
Yes.
So how does the Homelands intend to, will there be any deficiency in the actual process for Homelands without that $30 million a year?
Absolutely having the $30 million would be a lot better for us to be able to do planning work and to communicate to our beneficiaries with some level of certainty when projects were likely to develop, so they can plan accordingly. However, our path forward is to be as fiscally responsible as we can with the assets that we have, and to look at consistency with other state agencies, consistent with the Nelson lawsuit. So our first thing is to say, like every other state agency, the bulk of our administrative and operating expenses should be funded with general funding. That allows us to free up trust fund resources and earnings off of available lands, which are between 13 and 15 million a year, let's say, to go into infrastructure development for new homesteads. The second thing is, with those kinds of repair and maintenance expenditures, we've been working to try to shift those expenses that should be county functions to the county with the help of the legislature. The more we can do that, it frees up right now our budget is about 30% to 40% towards existing infrastructure that could go to new homestead development. With existing lots that have already been awarded, we would like to try to get those lots actually occupied or back into the inventory to re-award. So we're trying to be responsible with the resources that have already been given to us, and with those lands that are already developed, work to get those lands occupied, even in many cases they're leased but not occupied. So we're looking at our ag program. How do we get more people to farm? How do we get more people to actually occupy those lands? But without question, if this body were to deem an agreement with DHHL or a steady line item of sufficient funding for lot development that we could rely upon, and $30 million by the past 20 years, the legislature has been able to afford that, it would make it much easier for us to do the planning and the preparation with our beneficiaries. But we're going to do the best that we can with what we have every year, because that's our obligation to meet our mission of the department.
Yeah, and Chair, in conclusion, I think that as we move through the legislative process, that you'll want to provide more clarity to the subject matter committee, and then it'll make its way back to the money committees. But we'll need a little bit deeper clarity in terms of how you plan to to, I guess, offset or try and fill that gap.
Yes, and I'll be frank. If we're not able, we may not be able to. We're going to fill it as best as we can. But if we are short, what that will mean is the pace of development will slow, and so we can only develop with the resources that we have, and it may reduce what we're able to develop, causing people to wait longer for an opportunity to be on the homelands.
And it may cause for a little bit more creative type of approach as well.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. House members, questions? Okay, senators, any questions? Okay, Joby.
Yes. Senator.
Maybe if you could just at some point provide us with a calculation on how you folks came up with the $28 million ask for the sufficient funds.
Okay.
Cost, a breakdown of how specifically you came up with that particular
Okay.
total.
We can provide that to you. No problem.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions at this time? Senator President?
Good morning, Joby.
Good morning.
How are your efforts as far as dealing with some of the issues that the beneficiaries have been complaining about as far as people manipulating the system to get around the list?
That's a very good question. I'm assuming you're talking about the ability of people to purchase homesteads. Is that of the concern?
Yes,
the
and
concern you
using
have?
loopholes to get relatives or people to jump in front of the line. And I've heard all sorts of stories on these abuses, and that DHHL looks the other way. So
let me start by saying it's not an abuse in terms of that the Act does at the current time, or the rules do allow, or the rules are silent on the ability for an individual to sell their homestead. So that's the first place to start. And where it's been most problematic, frankly, has been the sale, not because with a typical lot, the lessee pays for the improvement or the home. And so like any individual, they should have the opportunity potentially to sell that at the time that they are, face a situation. But the more problematic issue is when individuals sell vacant lots, or in which there may no improvement whatsoever. That issue, actually, the Commission has grappled with, and I think there is a desire to look at that issue. So we will be bringing that to the Commission for consideration as to how do we manage that more effectively. And even in the sale of those lots that are, where there is actually an improvement on it. With every loan that's done on the homelands, there is an impact to the trust. So trying to minimize the impact of that to the trust. So those things, I think the Commission is in agreement. We do need to look at those things. There have been white papers drafted, and we need to bring that forward and out for discussion in the community.
There were also articles written about how people have been utilizing some of the land not in keeping with what was intended. So is that other areas in which you folks have been looking upon?
The most recent articles that I'm familiar with was the articles that were written in 2013, which are highly critical of our revocable permit program. We spent the last year looking at every revocable permit. We've gotten to almost 100% compliance. We have a few that are still problematic, and we actually went through working with the former administration, revisions and reforms to our revocable permit, which is a short-term use program that was most recently passed by the Commission. We will be going out for beneficiary consultation and meetings with our beneficiaries and the public at large for input into that process. It will be a more competitive process, focus on those lands that are actually shorter windows of time, so it's intended to be short-term uses, not long-term uses. And so, yes, there have been a lot of effort to reform that program.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes.
Just to follow up with regards to leasing of lands, can you explain to us why the lease arrangements are in some cases year to year in ag lands, or I'm not sure, if you have specific areas and your target the length of a lease. But, what we read, similar to what the president speaks on with regards to comments, but I've oftentimes see that, the comments coming out from the department is that they're year to year. I'm just wondering, why is it set at a particular term, a short term? As an example, if an ag lot is leased out, the commitment from a farmer, whether they're on Hawaiian homelands or any other ag lease within the state, a year is, to me, kind of ridiculous because of the infrastructure that you spend and to produce your product out in the use of the lands. And maybe you can explain where the terms of the leases to what portions of lands, whether it's ag or residential or
Sure.
or the larger lots.
Yes. So the department does several kinds of dispositions. Our core program is homesteading, which are 99-year leases for residential, farm, or ranch lots, going to our beneficiary individuals, which are defined as 50% Native Hawaiian or more. The lands that are not available for homesteading are then available for what's called general leasing. Those are leases like DLNR that go out to any member of the public, principally for income production. The length of time is usually longer, 65 years or longer. We also do licenses for public purpose, for mercantile, for utilities, for schools, churches, etc. The dispositions that you're talking about are short-term land management tools, again, not unlike other state agencies that are deemed revocable permits. They typically are 30 days, 1 month at a time. They can be renewed monthly up to a year, and then they're renewed, every month for another year. The criticism for DHHL, although it's not unique just to us, was that these short-term dispositions, which are intended to bring presence to the land, because we're a very small agency, we have one land agent to take care of all of Kauai, bring presence to the land to minimize dumping and other land management issues associated with that property. These short-term dispositions have become, by default, long-term dispositions because it's been a long time in terms of what the plans are for certain parcels of land. Understand, in DHHL's case, much of our unencumbered lands, those are lands that are in the department's inventory and not leased, are large tracts really intended for pasture or for ranching, but they don't have sufficient infrastructure for award. So our relook at our land management plan is to say, okay, if we know through our land use planning process that lands are not going to be readily available for development for another 30 plus years, perhaps we should look at longer term dispositions that maximize the improvement by someone else to those lands so that in 15 or 20 years they come back ready for award. So that's the difference with our RP, is really focusing on those lands in our revocable permit program that really are intended to be developed within the next 20 years, really short term. Because sometimes, even though it's the next 20 years, we may not get to it for 15. And so you still have the land management responsibilities of having people on the land, just managing, presence there. It's, as I said, the program was just the draft program was brought to the commission. We have to take that RP out. Our goal is to try to be clearer about our timeframes of development so that those who are on the land understand that we intend to take these properties back in 20 years or 15 years or 10 years. And the longer term dispositions, also understanding, if they are on a general lease for ag or pasture purposes. And we have not done those for a long time because beneficiaries have been critical of us providing those kinds of leases to non-Native Hawaiians as opposed to homesteading them. It's a complex issue, but that the return is about improving the land, getting it ready for homesteading. Yeah. So it's a constant, it's a constant balancing act, but I believe the reforms that have been suggested do improve our management of our properties at least, and hopefully the returns that we get from the lands that are out to other than our beneficiaries. You're welcome.
there seems to be, there is a large 8-digit difference between the governor's budget request and the, shall we say, HHL budget request.
Yes.
Can you give us some hints or help in how to resolve that, or who should resolve that, or what should resolve that? I mean,
So,
because what I suspect will happen is that, and I don't mean necessarily a resolution this year, it could be a multi-year resolution, because if there is no pathway toward a resolution, what I see is same old, same old. What will be approved this year would be pretty much based on what was approved last year.
okay. So I'll focus on the issue as it relates to the purpose for of the Hawaiian Homes Commission, or the Article 12, Section 1, Purpose 4, which is Operations and Administration, as an example. That the operations and administrative expenses of the department, which is the only category that is still working its way through the courts, you have a significant disparity between the governor's request and our definition of sufficiency. I believe, and I don't want to speak, but from what was argued in the courtroom, there is a difference in terms of definition. I believe it's the state and therefore the attorney generals, and in this particular matter, the department and the commission is represented by independent counsel. That sufficiency is about minimum, what's the minimum required, and they look at it from a definition of looking at what in 1976 was funding the operations of the department at about 1.4 to 1.6 million, and applying an inflation factor to that and arriving at a $9.6 million figure. For us, we can define specifically what those expenses are for, and in addition, what we feel we would need in terms of additional staffing to get to, a sufficient level of operation. For the department and for the commission, what we're seeking from the court, or perhaps through a process here, is a definition of what operations and administration entails. For us, it's personnel, other current expenditures, and repair and maintenance costs to maintain our infrastructure. That alone is an additional ask, as our testimony indicates, of I believe about 40 million. So, of course, we would hope that this body would agree with us, because we certainly can use the resources, but it is a difficult issue to grapple with, and that is the issue before the court. And if settlement is something that is accomplished, because I know that is a desire of the governor, he's spoken to me about it several times, it's getting down to what is defined in operations and administration. And so for us, it includes personnel, other current expenditures, and R&M costs to maintain our existing infrastructure. And we've identified those numbers in our testimony and can provide the detail later.
Can I? Well, I mean, that's what I mean. It's one thing to have the courts define what would fall under operations administration.
Yes.
I mean, in my mind, we could legislate that, or you could submit a bill defining what operations administration is. I mean, do we leave it to the courts?
So there are three parties to this case. There is the department and the Hawaiian Homes Commission, the state of Hawaii, which sounds like it's an oxymoron, but the state of Hawaii, and then the beneficiaries who brought the claim against the state. Our definition of what is sufficient for operations and administration is provided in our testimony. So we have provided that definition for you. It would be the ask of the Budget and Finance or the Governor's Office as to what is the basis for the 9.6, which actually I think was a number funded by the legislature. The prior governor had a slightly higher request than that. So.
Thank you.
Sure.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Hi, Hi, I'm looking at the page 3 of the overview, and I note that there are, it says approximately 5,200 mortgage loans on Hawaiian homelands, and that approximately 1,000 something are delinquent. Am I reading that correctly? Do we have that high of a percentage of mortgage delinquencies?
Yes, our delinquency is high, but the reason why it's high is because by definition, 100% of our mortgages that we deal with that are in our portfolio are risky. They have either been given because a borrower cannot find lending on the outside, or they have defaulted by a bank out and they are coming into our inventory. So our delinquency is high because by definition we are a risky portfolio.
Well, generally the mortgage loans are made through FHA and their HUD program.
Yes.
So due to the title issues,
Yes.
that does not mean that they're necessarily risky loans as far as the capacity to repay. It's more of the title fees. But my question goes to how concerned should we be about HUD eliminating or reducing these loan guarantees? If there's 20% delinquency, that's an alarming number. Is there any jeopardy to the program in that area?
The delinquency rate for the entire so in terms of the department's portfolio, the delinquency rate is probably between 30 and 40%. But that's our portfolio of loans that we hold. And 100% of those loans have come into our inventory because they've defaulted, or were given because, in terms of construction loans, because the borrower could not find financing anywhere else. In terms of our portfolio of loans, DHHL loans, there's a heavy emphasis, and we've done a lot in terms of the most recent year to bring additional services in financial literacy, foreclosure prevention, a lot of hand-holding that we do with our families.
So how's the relationship then with HUD? Are we, again, back to the question of federal loans,
yes.
Are we in any jeopardy there?
HUD is actually in a very secure position because the HUD, the way the insurance works is that the premiums that are collected from the loans that are written on DHHL fund a specific insurance pool. If the pool is insufficient, DHHL refunds that pool. The monies that come from DHHL come from the collections we do with our portfolio, as well as reawards, etc.
So we have no concern. There's not any imminent problem with the FHA financing then?
I wouldn't say that. Where we are at risk is that the size of the FHA mortgages, right now the limit for the FHA mortgage is the FHA max for Hawaiian homelands. That is substantially more than we could do with a direct loan. So we want to adjust the amount of the consent that we're willing to consent to so that it's more consistent with the risks associated with the portfolio. So for example, if you were to do a direct loan, you're limited to 1/2 of the FHA max. FHA max now in this county is about $600,000 to $700,000. That would be about a $300,000 to $400,000 unit, which is about what our units run. A consent like that is consistent with what we would do. Anything over that, we would say we want to charge some kind of additional cost so that it balances out the risks associated with the higher loan. So that's something that a reform we're looking at internally at DHHL, working with HUD.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair. Joby, I'm looking at the CIP request. Could you explain the traffic calming measure request of $250,000 a little bit more?
Sure. So I'm going to look around the camera. There were a number of, within our regional planning process, in that particular jurisdiction, there are a number of traffic concerns in the Nanakuli Valley area. And so we wanted to provide some resources because in many cases, our response back has been, this is actually a county function, or it's difficult for us to spend trust funds because trust funds need to exclusively benefit or should exclusively benefit beneficiaries. And so instead of having that hassle, we wanted to seek some funding from the legislature to help us address these concerns that are being faced by our beneficiaries and the citizens of this county in this particular region. So there are several different measures that we've been identified in the regional planning process in this particular area, like speed bumps, crosswalks, sidewalks, things like that.
Chair, may I? So I just want to be specific on this. You're focusing in the Homestead area.
Yes.
Possibly Haleakala or
Yes.
Nanakuli Avenue.
Yes.
Probably in regards to where the schools are, right?
Yes. Yes.
Not on Farrington Highway,
No.
which is a state.
No, not Farrington Highway. Up within the valley itself, exactly right, closer to where the schools are, where we've had a number of concerns regarding traffic safety for the children that attend school in those areas, or traffic calming measures regarding within the valley, not on the highway, not on the Farrington Highway.
And my understanding, the city has, and I know this for a fact, the city has said that is not their jurisdiction. It's DHHL. Okay.
And this is exactly why we're looking for these resources, so that these families don't get caught with us saying, well, it's trust funds and we can't spend it on a public road, those kinds of issues.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Any senators? If not, Representative Onishi.
Good morning, Joby.
Good morning.
Hi, I had a question for clarification.
Yes.
You mentioned in your original presentation that for FY 16 and 17, that the request is for 261 positions?
Yes.
And is that an increase of 61 positions
Yes.
per year?
It would be not per year.
Well, I
but
mean, the
total,
first
yes.
year in
Yes.
16. I was looking at your vacancy report, which is
Yes.
on table 13,
Yes.
and there are approximately 70 vacant positions,
Yes.
which, according to the date of vacancy, most of them, well, all except two, are before 2014.
Yes.
And it says you intend to fill them
Yes.
by 2015, or sometime in 2015, by the end of
Yes.
2015.
Yes.
So you're talking about 130 positions you're going to fill in 1 year?
Our goal is to right fit the vacancies to what we need. And we have been, if you notice the next page, we actually have been pushing very hard to fill positions. In many cases, these were positions that were ready to go. The remaining positions, in many cases, they may not be the right fit for what we need going forward. So we may have, for example, we have a number of, let's say, clerical, and really we need, in replace of two clerical, maybe one professional. So the focus in the last year and a half was really to get more, fill critical vacancies, which we aggressively pursued, and we were able to fill 28 positions between July 1st, 2013 and November 30th, 2014, with the bulk of those happening in the current fiscal year. As we go forward, the goal would be to relook at our positions and right fit the number of positions that we need for what what we are doing moving forward. The sufficient,
Okay,
yes.
but these 61 new positions don't fall into that category.
No.
There are additional positions that you need in order to carry out your responsibilities.
That's what we're saying. We would need to operate at a sufficient level. Yes, that's correct.
But you already have 70 vacancies.
Yes, and I understand the question, and it's a very good one. But our obligation is to ask for what we feel we would need to sufficiently operate, and our goal is to try to meet this this commitment of filling these vacancies and adding the additional positions, in working with the system that we work within.
Okay, so I have a question. If you got 70 vacancies, many of which have been vacant for the past fiscal year, and this current fiscal year, what happens with that money?
For now, those resources is what helps us to pay for overtime requests, which is not substantial. But, for example, in filling on the personnel side, for example, is where some of our overtime expenditures are. We are out in recruitment for a personnel clerk. Our hope is that will reduce, by filling that clerk position, it will reduce some of our expenditures on the overtime expense.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Any senators? Okay.
Thank you. The Nelson decision, the trial court is in the fall.
The trial date is set for May. There was a hearing that was held in the fall on various motions that were filed by the various parties. The court has not rendered a decision as of yet with regard to that hearing.
Okay, so specifically, is DHHL asking for the $28 million, a specific amount to be determined by the court as administrative costs?
We are asking for actually the $40 million.
Okay. So you're asking for a specific...
I'm sorry, not the 40, the 68.6
So you're
million.
asking for a specific dollar amount.
We are actually asking for a definition as to what is included in operations and administration and have the corresponding numbers related to that. But our position is that operations and administration includes personnel, other current expenditures, and repair and maintenance of existing infrastructure.
Associated with a specific dollar amount.
I believe that the exhibits include a specific dollar amount, but we're not asking for 28 million alone. We're asking for categories, a definition of categories that should be included in operations and administration, for that clarity from the court.
Okay, and the Attorney General's office is also conversely specifically asking for certain definition to be included, which is equivalent to a certain dollar amount.
I believe the Attorney General's position is different. They take a different logic. They are asking for they take the number from the 1978 Constitutional Convention, which is articulated in the reports, and apply an inflation factor to that.
Inflation. And then,
yes.
Okay. Okay. I guess the concern, aren't you folks a little bit concerned that when the court rules on what the sufficient amount is, and if they put a specific dollar amount, we're all gonna be held to that specific amount, and the duties of the commission might change over time, and you may have different type of administrative costs. So let me give you an example. Under the Lingo administration, they did a substantial amount of land development and development of lots.
Yes.
So you would assume that the administrative costs associated with the development of lots would be high,
yes,
compared to now, because during that time, because they did so much, they blew all the money. So right now you don't have that much money to develop the lots. So the administrative costs associated with development of lots would be different depending on what the legislature appropriates, specifically like what the Senator Galterias talked about. If the legislature would provide DHHL additional CIP money for development of lots, your administrative costs will increase depending on what the development would be. So I would think
Yes, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I would think for you folks, it would be beneficial for you. It's probably too late, but for all parties involved, it would have been more beneficial to argue a percentage as opposed to certain definition, because my concern for you folks is you're going to be held to a specific amount. And at any given time, the legislature could also change the amount given or whatever else it is, and you may end up with a substantial larger duties that the current sufficiency argument is not going to include.
So our approach, and I understand, and it will be up to the court, and of course if this body along with the governor's office chose to seek a settlement, there may be a different path forward in terms of a percentage of the base development costs, etc. Let me just say, for clarification purposes, it is not as if our production has dropped substantially since the Lingle administration. We're actually turning dirt on almost every island as we speak. So we have dirt turning on the Big Island, Lalamilo, 81 lots, 117 lots in Kona, in East Kapolei, out in Kauai. But the costs are not as high as they were during the Lingle administration, and we are looking at absorbing additional lots. But our point in terms of seeking the clarification of the definition, so arguably if the court agrees with us and personnel and other current expenditures, which arguably go up and down depending on the amount of development that you're doing, would be included in operations and administration. Those definitions equate to a certain amount, of course, but we're not asking for only 28 million or 20 million. Our approach is to say operations and administration should include personnel, other current expenditures, and repair and maintenance. Now, arguably you could say, well, we don't only want to see your budgeted figures, we want to see what you've encumbered, what you've expended. Those are the conversations that can happen at the court. But certainly we are open to dialogue about this. Our goal is to try to achieve consistency with other state agencies, especially those that do not have other sources of funding in terms of the way the operations and administration are funded with general funding resources.
Well, the legislature is not a party to your lawsuit, so it's not as if we can have dialogue on the settlement discussion.
Actually, Article 12, the legislature is the only entity that has the obligation to make the sufficient sums available. So the obligation per the Constitution is actually on this body because it is the legislature that shall make sufficient sums available. So
that is true, but then the whole lawsuit is about allowing the court, or the court determined that they will determine what sufficiency is. So it's not, at that point in time, currently the case does not include the legislative body as a party. So I don't think it's appropriate for the legislature to be involved in your personal settlement discussion with the Attorney General's office. That's my point.
Okay.
Just as a follow-up to that as well, Joby.
Yes.
I know you're going to be getting for us the calculations for how you came up with that $28 million figure so we can better come to terms with how we're going to deal with that disconnect, as Representative Kobayashi mentioned, between the $9.6 million number that the administration put forward and the $28 million that the commission came forward with. But can you also, in that, and I'm assuming that that's part of the calculation figures that you folks came up with, show specifically how in that calculation and coming up with that numbers, it reflects how the commission is carrying out specifically the purposes 1, 2, and 3 of the commission, and how that's reflected in the numbers. So, how are you currently and in the future going forward through those types of appropriations doing the development? How are you increasing or currently doing those loan programs? How are you doing improving the welfare and the education of beneficiaries? So specifically looking at how those breakdowns of those 3 particular purposes are being met and reflected and carried out by the funding of purpose for and distributed in those costs, and how you calculated for that in coming up with that particular number, so we can clearly see how that's all correlated.
Okay.
When
we can get that information.
Take that into account, because I think that's very important for all of us in terms of really understanding too. How are the loan programs being administered? What loan programs are you looking at, and how is that a priority balanced out with the development, balanced out with education and improvement, quality of life improvement for beneficiaries as well. I know that's a big issue for many of our members. So that is going to be some important piece of information that we do get from you that we will share with members.
Sure. We'll be happy to make that available.
Okay. Any other questions? Representative Jordan?
Joby.
Yes.
The request last year was how much for your budget?
Our sufficient funds, or from the governor?
No, your submission to the governor last year and what you were going to ask for your budget purpose last year.
Ronnie, do you recall, was it 27? I believe it was a little less, maybe 27, about 20 in terms of the repair and the operation, the personnel and other current expenditures. The request to the legislature for the current fiscal year, 27. Yeah.
It was about 27
for the A and B costs, and then the R&M cost was about 13 or 14, 36. Sorry. So the R&M cost was about 36. So together, that would be our purpose for operations and administration.
And then out of that, the governor will submit his budget, right?
Yes.
And he took that down to what amount?
14.6 million, I believe.
So actually, you came in here asking for 14.6. Well, governor came in asking for 14.6.
Yes. And the legislature funded 9.6 million.
And I'm thinking that 9.6 was actually for personnel.
Principally, it carried us through 3 quarters of actual operations. We were pretty much out of funding on the general fund side by the beginning of 4th quarter.
For personnel.
And some other current expenditures, but principally personnel, yes. It covers the bulk of our personnel costs. Our first year, we were trying to work out some of these expenditure issues, but it does cover the bulk of our personnel costs.
No, my understanding, that was actual body
Yes, warm
positions,
bodies,
not
yes.
vacant positions,
Yes.
correct?
Yes. Yes.
And taking into account of everything else
Yes.
that
So-
was being discussed with vacancies and personnel in the last 2 years, right?
Yes, so it is a warm body count in terms of covering our personal expenditures.
The 9.6.
The bulk of it,
The bulk of
yes.
Okay. So now you've worked at trying to hire positions.
Yes.
Trying to weed out what is true vacancies and non-vacancies. Have you been working on job descriptions as well?
We have, since we were able to hire a management analyst to assist our personnel office to look specifically at that issue. That's the focus for the next few years, is improving the job descriptions, right fitting the vacancies to the jobs that we need, all of those kinds of activities. Our first focus was to fill those vacancies that were ready to go, critical vacancies, and that's what you've seen is the 28 positions that we filled.
Okay. So my understanding, the 9.6 was just to pay the bodies that were in those positions.
Principally, I mean, we didn't only spend it on ACOS. There were some other expenditures that we had as well that we used that money for.
And
yes.
I'm new to this world, 4 years. So
Yes.
my understanding, that was the first time this legislature has provided funding for operational or employee costs for this department.
At that level, yes.
Okay. Prior to that, the $30 million that was always coming to your department was in regards to a settlement.
Yes.
That happened almost 30 years ago now.
Yes, 1995.
And then that settlement, in essence, forced the department to use that for operational costs and personnel costs.
Actually, what happened was the $30 million provided in settlement resources principally funded our CIP for the last 20 years that we've been receiving it. There are those that argue that that settlement really should not have gone, that there was an obligation to provide CIP through those years to meet the lot development purpose under the Article 12. But in any case, that $30 million did go, those settlement resources principally went to pay for lot development over the last 20 years. In the early years, during the Cayetano administration, there was a small general fund balance, less than $2 million. That, along with our administration account, which is funded with earnings off of available lands, general leases, licenses, revocable permits, paid for our operations. During the Lingle administration, those resources dwindled to zero in terms of the general fund. And so 100% of our operating costs were paid for with resources generated by the department until we received the $9.6 million from the legislature in the last fiscal year.
Okay, and then we've kind of already discussed
Yes.
what that kind of equated to, and I think we're waiting for this Nelson case or this Yang pull.
Yes.
That's kind of what I'm hearing right now.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Just one question. You're a
Sure.
state agency, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Joby.
Okay, thank you.